A drone operator at Kandahar airfield at 0537 hours on a November morning in 2001 is staring at his thermal feed, and he has stopped breathing. Two vehicles are moving down a mountain road at a speed that makes no sense in the dark, kicking up rooster tails of heat on the infrared. Behind each one, dragging on the ground, are long shapes. He zooms in. He keys his radio with a hand that isn't quite steady and says, "Kandahar TOC, this is Overwatch. I have two unidentified vehicles approaching east perimeter. They appear to be dragging bodies. How copy?" A long pause, then, "How many bodies?" He counts, loses count, counts again. Says very quietly, "A lot, sir." 2 minutes later, the base perimeter is filling with soldiers. American soldiers, hundreds of them, pulled from their cots and chow lines and briefings by word of mouth that travels faster than any radio call. Drawn by some animal instinct that something unprecedented is about to roll through that gate. Two Land Rover Defender 110s come through the checkpoint at walking pace. Their frames are caked in something that is equal parts red mountain mud and something darker, something that does not reflect light the way mud does. Both vehicles are pocked with bullet impacts. One has no windshield. The other is missing its driver's mirror. Behind each one, knotted tight around ankles with military rappel rope, the bodies of Taliban commanders are being dragged across the gravel of the airfield. 10 men climb out of those vehicles. Their uniforms are in pieces. One has a field dressing on his forearm that has soaked through twice and dried twice. Another walks with a limp he refuses to acknowledge. Their faces are the faces of men who have not slept in 2 days, and who spent both of those days being hunted by a force 30 times their number, and nobody says anything for a long moment. Then one American private starts clapping, then another. Then the sound builds until it is not applause anymore. It is a roar, hundreds of men and women of every rank standing in the dust giving a standing ovation to 10 British soldiers who should not be alive. A full-bird colonel who commanded operations in the Gulf War turns to the British liaison officer beside him and says 4 words. "What the hell are they?" That question deserves an answer. And the answer starts 80 kilometers away, 48 hours earlier in the mountains above Kandahar, where the math said these men were already dead. Kandahar, November 2001. The coalition offensive in the south of Afghanistan has the momentum of a boulder rolling downhill, on paper. In reality, it moves like a man trying to catch smoke. The Taliban has been fighting in this terrain since before most of the American soldiers here were born. They know every ravine, every goat trail, every fold in the rock where a man can disappear and a satellite will see nothing but stone. The mountains hold the shape of every army that ever came here and left broken. The Soviets spent 10 years learning this. Now the most expensive military apparatus in human history, with B-52s and Predator drones and AC-130 gunships and a logistics chain that delivers hot meals anywhere in country within 48 hours, is being outmaneuvered by men in sandals who grew up in these valleys, and the intelligence picture is a patchwork of rumor and stale intercepts. The Taliban uses couriers, fire signals, patterns invisible to any analyst in Langley trying to decode Afghan mountain culture from a satellite feed. The result is a war where the most powerful alliance in human history is perpetually reacting, perpetually a step behind, perpetually arriving at places where something important already happened and is now over. Into this, and the British Special Air Service deploys what it always deploys when conventional force fails. Small teams, invisible teams. The SAS approach to Afghanistan is the same approach it used in the Falklands, the Gulf, the jungles of Borneo. You put skilled men into the space between what your side knows and what the enemy thinks you don't know, and you let them work. 10 men can go where 1,000 cannot. Because 1,000 men cannot be silent and cannot be invisible, and the concept rests on a paradox that conventional military thinking finds philosophically offensive. Less is more. Not every coalition commander embraces this. The American officers running the Southern campaign are trained in a system that measures effectiveness in numbers. Troops deployed, sorties flown, ordnance expended, terrain secured. The SAS offers none of these metrics. They show up with no fanfare. 60 operators in country total, working in small patrols across a theater that requires 100,000 coalition personnel to partially manage. To a certain kind of military thinking, 60 men is a rounding error, not a decisive force. Noise in the data. Sergeant Neil Crossley has heard this argument before. 14 years in the regiment, more total hours in hostile territory than most soldiers spend in uniform. He is precise, minimal, and competent in the particular way that creates gravity, a quality that holds a patrol together through things that would otherwise be unsurvivable. His 10-man element, designated Patrol Sabre, is inserted by helicopter into mountainous terrain 80 kilometers south of any coalition presence on the night of November the 3rd. The brief is clean. Observe and report the movement of a Taliban column, estimated at 80 fighters, moving through mountain valleys toward a staging position near Kandahar. 18 hours. In silent, intelligence collected, out invisible. What happens next is not a failure of courage. It is the kind of failure that wars produce with depressing regularity. The American and British command elements handling extraction are operating on different radio frequencies. This is not a metaphor. The literal wavelengths are misaligned, and the misalignment has not been caught in pre-mission coordination. When Crossley radios for extraction status at the window, the signal lands nowhere. Even when the American element tries to raise the patrol for confirmation, that signal lands nowhere too. In the silence that follows, someone at the Kandahar Operations Center enters into the system the designation that a zone of war requires when contact cannot be confirmed: missing. Presumed. The word that follows presumed in a war zone is always the same word. Crossley waits at the extraction point through the window and past it. He tries every frequency in the protocol. Static. Emergency frequencies. Static. The kind of off-book frequencies that only exist in the institutional memory of the regiment, passed down between operators who have been here before. Static. By the time dawn begins to lighten the eastern sky, the fact is undeniable. They are alone, 80 kilometers from any friendly force, in Taliban heartland, with supplies designed for 18 hours that have been burning down for 11. He gathers his 9 men in a depression in the rock, and he does not waste time on the situation. They all know the situation. He tells them what comes next. Push north along the ridge line. Move only in darkness. Close the distance to the nearest coalition element over the following night. Not a good plan. The plan that is available. The men nod. Some drink water. One eats a ration bar without expression. They are not pretending to be calm. They are calm, and the difference between pretending and being is the product of years of a training process designed specifically to manufacture this reaction when everything around it is on fire. They do not make it to the ridge. At 06:20 hours on the morning of November the 4th, the Taliban column they were sent to observe makes contact with Patrol Sabre's position. Not the 80 men the intelligence brief described, and the force Crossley can count from the stone crater at 2,400 meters numbers in the hundreds. 300 fighters minimum, pickups with DSK heavy machine guns mounted in the truck beds, 82mm mortars on pack animals ready to assemble in minutes, RPGs and AKs, and the absolute confidence of a force that outnumbers what it is about to eliminate by a ratio that, in any military calculation, means one outcome and one outcome only. Crossley looks at his 9 men. He looks at the ground. He looks at the enemy below, spreading into position, beginning to define the shape of a systematic elimination. He runs the math. The math provides its answer. Then he does what the SAS does, which is to refuse the answer the math provides and find the question the math missed. He says we attack at dawn. Whoever waits dies. The logic is brutal and correct. Sitting in the crater and waiting to be surrounded guarantees one result. Moving aggressively before the enemy has fully established its positions might create a window. So Crossley divides his 10 men into 2 cells of 5. The Taliban's firepower advantage is concentrated in 2 assets, the DSHK guns and the mortar teams. Without those, 300 men with AKs are dangerous but manageable in this terrain. So those die first. In what follows over the next 19 hours is a chapter in small unit warfare that deserves its own volume, and will probably never get one, because the people who were there are either dead or classified or simply not the kind of men who write books about themselves. Corporal Davies moves to the first mortar position at 0647 hours, covering 300 meters of exposed rocky slope in 11 minutes. He's using the contour of the ground so precisely that he is never visible from the position for more than 2 seconds at a time. He reaches it with no conventional demolitions available. What he has are Taliban mortar rounds stripped from enemy packs and the knowledge, embedded in his hands more than his conscious mind, of how to convert them into something that will end the position. In 4 minutes, he builds and places 2 improvised devices against the base plate and the ammunition stack. And he is 200 meters away when they detonate. The sound rolls across the mountain like something geological. The second mortar position, now alert and moving, is already being flanked. Sergeant Okafor takes the first DSHK from above, from the direction the mount cannot effectively traverse because it is designed to engage targets at or below horizontal. The gunner dies before he understands the angle being used against him. The second DSHK is on a moving pickup. Okafor doesn't engage the gunner. He engages the driver. The truck goes into a ditch. The gun is operational, but the truck is not, and a DSHK without mobility in mountain terrain is just a position, and a position can be flanked. By 0900, both mortar positions are destroyed. 2 of 3 DSHK guns are out. The third has been moved to a reverse slope that denies the patrol a direct angle. Problem acknowledged. Problem worked. For the next 10 hours, the patrol does what the regiment has been doing in every environment where it has been dropped since 1941. It ghosts. It materializes and dematerializes in the terrain with a speed and unpredictability that the Taliban cannot model. Every time a fire team moves to where they heard shooting, the shooting is somewhere else. Every time a position is identified and a group moves to envelop it, the position is empty and there are suddenly rounds coming from an angle the envelopment was supposed to eliminate. The patrol uses Taliban dead as cover, positioning behind bodies because fighters won't fire on their own men, and those seconds of hesitation are seconds to move through. They strip weapons and ammunition from every fallen fighter, replenishing what they expend almost in real time, turning the enemy's logistics into their own supply chain. And the psychological effect on the Taliban force is something that begins subtly and becomes impossible to contain. 300 men, well-armed, well-positioned, with overwhelming firepower, are being taken apart piece by a force they cannot fix, cannot locate, and cannot stop. Fighters who came down for what should have been a straightforward elimination are starting to ask each other questions that have no comfortable answers. How many are there? Is there air support coming? Is this a trap? The men asking are not cowards. They are experienced fighters in familiar terrain. But they have never fought this before. They have never been in a battle where the geometry keeps inverting, where every position becomes a liability, where their numbers seem not to multiply their effectiveness but to slow them down, make them loud, make them visible in ways that 10 men moving through rock and shadow are not. Fear in combat does not announce itself, and it accumulates in small things, the hesitation before a man moves from cover, the tendency to cluster instead of spread, voices louder than radio protocol allows, eyes that track upward more than outward because whatever is killing your comrades keeps appearing from above. 300 men who began the day with confidence end it adjacent to panic, and that adjacency is the most dangerous place a large force can be in contact with a small one, because it turns every fighter inward. He makes each man think about his own survival rather than the collective mission. Begins the slow dissolution of unit cohesion that the patrol has been engineering deliberately for the past 10 hours. By hour 19, the toll on Patrol Sabre is real. 2 men are down with wounds beyond field dressing capacity. Garrett has a through-and-through in his right thigh, tourniquet managed for 6 hours, and a tourniquet has a clock. Singh has fragmentation in his left arm and shoulder, the arm still functional but trending wrong. Ammunition is critical, despite everything taken from the enemy. And the Taliban, despite its losses and confusion, has not broken. Its commanders have been watching and they have reached the correct tactical conclusion. The British force is small, much smaller than the chaos it created would suggest. The remaining fighters are now being organized not for frontal assault, but for the slow, methodical closing of the net, working from multiple directions simultaneously, cutting escape routes, shrinking the box. The box is getting smaller, and Crossley knows it. He runs the options the way the regiment trains you to run them, not in sequence but in parallel, evaluating each against the ground and the force and the time remaining. And then something changes the geometry entirely. 200 meters down a boulder-choked valley the patrol has been using as a transit route behind a collapsed livestock wall. There are 2 Land Rover Defender 110s. Taliban-acquired faded camouflage over original coalition tan. GPMGs mounted in their rear beds. Captured from a coalition element months earlier and stored here, fuel still in the tanks, saved for an operation significant enough to justify using them. The patrol has passed within 20 meters of this position twice in the last 6 hours without seeing it. They were looking for fighters, not equipment. Every SAS operator qualifies on every significant ground vehicle produced since the 1950s. This is not a line in a brochure. It is a requirement, and it is met. Crossley and every man in the patrol can operate these vehicles the way most people operate a standard automatic by feel and reflex and a mechanical intimacy that comes from hours inside these specific platforms. In 4 minutes, both vehicles are started, assessed, confirmed operational, and the GPMG ammunition from the Taliban's own cache beside the vehicles is loaded and locked. The last DSHK is 300 meters west. The Taliban encirclement has its highest density on the northern and southern approaches. The eastern flank runs directly through the Taliban's central camp, where the command element is located, where the concentration of fighters is highest, where no rational military logic would ever direct a vehicle assault with 10 men at night. Conventional military logic, Crossley has spent 14 years learning, is the enemy's primary defensive asset. It tells them where you won't go. It tells them what you won't do. It tells them the eastern approach is safe because no rational actor attempts to drive 2 vehicles through 300 armed fighters in the dark. Crossley orders the eastern approach. The 2 defenders hit the camp at maximum speed for the terrain, in somewhere around 50 kilometers per hour on mountain rock in the dark, which feels faster because the camp is lit by fire and the fires throw shadows that make distances impossible to judge. The GPMG gunners are already firing when the first tents become visible. The Taliban fighters in the command area have perhaps 3 seconds between hearing the engines and being run through by 2 vehicles firing belt-fed machine guns at 850 rounds per minute each. 3 seconds is not enough time to transition from a command meeting to engaging a vehicle assault. 3 seconds is barely enough time to stand up. Dozens do not manage it. What saves Patrol Sabre in those 30 seconds is exactly the thing conventional commanders find philosophically unsatisfying about the regiment. The willingness to execute the thing the math says cannot work, because the math models stressed human behavior, and the men of Patrol Sabre are not operating under stress in the way the math models it. They are in the eye of it, the still point that years of training has carved out in each of them. Heart rates elevated but controlled, hands steady. Decisions being made not by the frightened conscious mind that war usually operates through, but by something deeper and older and less attached to outcome. The part of a trained soldier that simply executes, that applies technique to problem, and that loads the next task before the current one resolves. Crossley loses his driver's mirror to a round that passes 2 centimeters from his right ear. He does not reduce speed. He corrects his steering for the lost reference point, and he accelerates into the next curve, because slowing down on that approach is the one thing that turns survivable into unsurvivable, and his body knows this before his mind confirms it. And the defenders break through the eastern edge of the camp and hit the downward slope at speed. Behind them, the camp is in chaos, men running in directions that cross each other, muzzle flashes pointing everywhere, including at each other. The perfect confusion of a force whose command element has just been erased and which has no unified picture of where the enemy went. The last DSHK fires twice. Both rounds go long and wide. The sound of it recedes up the slope as the vehicles accelerate down. And they drive for 6 hours. Not the direct route to Kandahar, which has Taliban checkpoints already mapped and now presumably on alert. They drive the secondary route, 3 riverbeds, 40 extra kilometers, avoiding every choke point. The 2 wounded men are in the rear of the first defender. The patrol medic monitors them with the periodic professional thoroughness of a man who does not have the luxury of being frightened by what he sees, and therefore is not. Crossley reaches into his vest pocket somewhere in those 6 hours and confirms that the intelligence document is still there, folded in quarters. Covered in mountain dust and dried blood from a cut above his eyebrow he has not looked at because looking at it would require a mirror, and the mirror is 2 centimeters and a bullet away from still being attached to the door. The document will be delivered. That was the mission. The mission does not change because the circumstances became extreme, and the regiment does not have a protocol for mission too dangerous to complete. It has a culture built on the premise that the objective is the constant and the operator is the variable, and the variable flexes to whatever the situation requires until the constant is achieved. At 05:37 hours on November the 6th, 2001, Patrol Sabre crosses the Kandahar airfield perimeter, and the soldiers who were on that perimeter have described the moment in accounts that share a consistent emotional texture across all of them. The silence first, the weight of it, the collective understanding that what was rolling through that gate was something they would not see again. Then one set of hands clapping, then the roar building until it is something felt in the chest as much as heard. Generals standing beside privates, senior NCOs who had not shown visible emotion in 15 years standing there with their mouths open. A full-bird colonel who did 2 tours in the Gulf War, a man built to be unimpressed, clapping at the same volume as the private next to him. The 10 men of Patrol Sabre do not respond to the ovation, not because they are unaffected, because they are completely spent. Because the body, when it has operated at its absolute limit for 48 hours and then receives the signal that extraction is complete, does something that has no technical military term but every soldier who has been there recognizes. It stops. Not dramatically, quietly and completely, all the systems running at maximum efficiency because maximum efficiency was required decelerate to their maintenance state. And the tactical unit becomes again a human being with wounds and exhaustion, and an internal silence that is not rest, but the quiet of a body that has used everything it had. Crossley walks to the American duty officer. He reaches into his vest pocket. He takes out the folded document, stained and intact. He hands it over. Some accounts say he said nothing. One account, which circulates more persistently than the others and has the feel of truth to it, says he handed it over and said, "Sorry about the delay." Garrett and Singh are in surgery within the hour. Both survive. The others sleep between 14 and 18 hours. When they wake, there are debriefs, medical reviews, reports filed in the bureaucratic language that militaries use to translate the unsurvivable into something that fits a template. Months later, in ceremonies without cameras or press, in rooms where every attendee understands the context, there are decorations, the conspicuous gallantry cross, the military cross. Hardware delivered in boxes in silence to men who do not need it confirmed, because the confirmation already happened in a stone crater at 2,400 meters when they decided the math was wrong. There is no press conference, no interview, no documentary. The names stay classified for years. Because the SAS's value is predicated on the enemy not knowing its capabilities, its methods, or its personnel. Every piece of information that enters the public domain is a piece the enemy can use. The silence is not heroic restraint. It is professional discipline applied with the same rigor as every other element of their craft. But silence cannot contain everything. The story moves anyway, through the channels stories use when official ones are closed. Memory, conversation. Or the specific respect that soldiers show each other across national boundaries when what is being respected transcends nationality. American soldiers who were on that perimeter that morning talk about it for decades. They talk about it to their sons and their sons' friends. The story travels the way true stories travel, accumulating nothing false, losing nothing essential, arriving to each new listener with the same specific gravity it had when those two vehicles came through the gate. And the Taliban commanders who survived those 48 hours carried back something more valuable and more damaging than any intelligence report. They carried knowledge of what they had encountered. A force of 10 had operated against 300 for 2 days. It had not been defeated, not been fixed, not been destroyed by any of the processes available to a force with overwhelming numerical advantage on its own terrain. This knowledge, spreading through the Taliban's operational network in the weeks that followed, produced an effect that no airstrike could replicate. Because the thing that degrades an insurgent organization faster than firepower is uncertainty. Uncertainty about where the threat is, when it will materialize, against what target. Uncertainty that makes every safe house feel less safe, every command meeting feel like a potential last meeting. And the SAS's effect in Kandahar in those months was not primarily measured in fighters killed. Though the numbers were significant, it was measured in the quality of sleep in Taliban command elements, in the seconds of hesitation that appeared in fighters who had previously moved with confidence through terrain they owned, in the meetings that started happening at rotating locations with rotating participants, designed to prevent the kind of precise targeting that was leaving holes in the organizational chart, with a regularity that felt supernatural to the people experiencing it. The gradual, reluctant revision in the coalition's conventional command structure comes not from any single briefing, but from data that accumulates until it cannot be argued with. The strategic impact per operator is orders of magnitude beyond anything a conventional unit of comparable size can produce. The ratio is absurd, yet it does not fit the model. And when reality persistently fails to fit the model, eventually the model has to change. Generals who began the campaign treating special operations as a supporting capability begin rebuilding their operational plans around special operations as the main effort, with conventional forces in support. Not a comfortable transition for officers whose careers were built on commanding large formations, but a correct one. And the correctness of it is demonstrated every time a small patrol does something the metrics say is impossible, and departs leaving a strategic impact out of all proportion to its size. The colonel who asked what they were eventually had his answer. Not in the form of a briefing, but through the accumulation of evidence that cannot be argued with. He watched the pattern, and he watched targets that his conventional units could not locate being disrupted by patrols he could fit inside a single platoon's vehicle allocation. And at some point the question he asked in bewilderment became an answer he carried in respect. They are what happens when you build a military institution around the human being rather than around the human being's equipment. That specific knowledge, in the knowledge that lives in the body of a man who has been to the place where everything runs out and kept going, it cannot be briefed or bought or manufactured by any technology that exists. It is experiential, deposited in layers over years of training and deployment, physiological as much as psychological. It changes the relationship between the conscious mind and the survival systems in ways that alter behavior at the root. The men of Patrol Sabre carried this before Kandahar, and the mountains added to it. Put another layer down that will be there for the rest of their lives, in the hands, in the reflexes, in the specific quality of calm that comes over them when a situation gets bad. The calm that is not the absence of awareness, the presence of mastery. One American sergeant, 2 previous combat deployments, not easily impressed, stood by those bullet-scarred defenders for 10 minutes one afternoon. Someone asked him afterward what he was looking at. He said he was trying to trace the route in his head from the impact distribution, trying to visualize the sequence of the breach. Then he said, "Every time I think I've got it, I realize there's a moment in there where the right answer and the crazy answer are the same answer. And they just kept picking it. That's the whole thing. Right there. The intersection of the right answer and the crazy answer. In any situation with good options available, training matters, but the options do the work. And it is the situation with no good options, only impossible ones, where that intersection appears, where the person who has been prepared for it executes and the person who has not hesitates. In the gap between execute and hesitate, in that interval measured in seconds and sometimes in less, the outcome lives. 10 men, 80 kilometers from any friendly force. 300 enemy fighters in terrain the enemy owns. 18 hours of supplies at the start of hour 11, no air, no artillery, no extraction. The math says one thing. 10 men of Patrol Sabre found the variable the math had not accounted for and changed the outcome. The intelligence report was delivered on time. The mission was complete. The debrief noted that the patrol had executed its primary and secondary objectives under conditions exceeding all pre-mission risk parameters. Noted. As if it were a logistical fact. A line in a spreadsheet. Because for the men who were there, it was not a miracle. And it was a job done under difficult circumstances by people trained to do jobs under difficult circumstances. It was what they do. Wars are won and lost in a place with no geographic coordinates. Won and lost in the space between what a person believes is possible and what they are willing to attempt. The hardware matters. The logistics matter. The strategy matters. But the limiting factor, always, in every conflict in every century, is the human being at the edge of what can be asked of a human being. The one who has been there before and knows the way through. 10 men, 2 vehicles, 48 hours, and a question a colonel asked in bewilderment that became over time something more like a definition. They are the ones who read the math and change the variable. They are the ones for whom the crazy answer and the right answer are the same answer, in who have been so thoroughly prepared for that moment that when it arrives, they do not pause. They are the ones who drove through the camp. They are the ones who came back.